The cameras had already been rolling for 9 minutes when Donald Trump leaned into the microphone, his lips curling into that familiar smirk, the one that could command crowds or condescend without a word. The room, packed shoulder to shoulder with legal advisors, media personnel, congressional aides, and half the damn internet watching on live stream, held its breath. Trump cleared his throat, eyes narrowing on his target across the U-shaped bench. "You care more about illegals than you do about Americans," he said, his voice sharp, tinged with disdain. "You're a disgrace to this country." No one gasped. They didn't need to. The silence itself recoiled. Jasmine Crockett sat poised, spine straight, hands folded neatly, a silver pen motionless beneath her thumb. Her face didn't flicker, no raised eyebrow, no defense, just a deliberate pause as the insult settled across the air like dust after a detonation. From behind her, murmurs rose, aid to aid, a shuffle of folders, an audible click of a camera adjusting its focus. Somewhere in the gallery a spectator whispered, "He really said that?" But Jasmine remained immovable. Trump reclined slightly, satisfied. He'd rehearsed that line, delivered it at rallies in Nevada and Georgia, had it poll-tested for impact, and red meat appeal. This was more than grandstanding. This was bait. He expected a swing, a raised voice, a reactive cut from her. He expected fire. He didn't expect strategy. Jasmine slowly reached for the mic in front of her. Her fingers were steady. Her voice, when it came, was controlled and cool, too calm to be comfortable. "I'd like to respond," she said. Not asked, stated. She adjusted her chair just slightly, enough to draw the eye, enough to signal that what was coming wasn't rage, but reckoning. Across the dais, a Republican senator cleared his throat as if bracing for turbulence. On the monitor B, behind her, the comment feed on C-SPAN's YouTube stream exploded. "Whoa, she's coming for him." Finally, Jasmine didn't raise her voice. "You call me disgraceful," she said, "because I advocate for children to not sleep in cages, because I question whether terrorizing desperate families is what this flag was meant to stand for." She turned briefly to the committee chair, then back to Trump. "You want to make immigration a weapon? Let's talk weapons." Her staff, seated just behind her, began sliding a yellow folder forward on the table. A thick tab labeled, "Trump Family Immigration Record, 1885 to 1972. Trump's jaw tightened. No smirk this time. He straightened, squinting slightly. Jasmine's voice grew colder. "Because if we're going to measure patriotism by who crossed which border and when, then I suggest we take a long, hard look at who you really are." Now the gasps came. A reporter stood at the back of the room, fingers flying across their keyboard. One of Trump's legal aides reached for a notepad, whispering something rapid into a mic clipped to his collar. Jasmine leaned back. "I won't be shamed by a man whose own family history reads like the asylum applications you now call criminal." Trump sat still. His fingers, which had moments ago been drumming casually on the wood, had stopped. The tension didn't need music. It had memory. It had lineage. It had a reckoning waiting at the edge of every sentence. And the reckoning, it seemed, had just arrived. The cameras had already been rolling for 9 minutes when Donald Trump leaned into the microphone, his lips curling into that familiar smirk, the one that could command crowds or condescend without a word. The room, packed shoulder to shoulder with legal advisors, media personnel, congressional aides, and half the damn internet watching on live stream, held its breath. Trump cleared his throat, eyes narrowing, on his target across the U-shaped bench. "You care more about illegals than you do about Americans," he said, his voice sharp, tinged with disdain. "You're a disgrace to this country." No one gasped. They didn't need to. The silence itself recoiled. Jasmine Crockett sat poised, spine straight, hands folded neatly, a silver pen motionless beneath her thumb. Her face didn't flicker, no raised eyebrow, no defense, just a deliberate pause as the insult settled across the air like dust after a detonation. From behind her, murmurs rose, aid to aid, a shuffle of folders, an audible click of a camera adjusting its focus. Somewhere in the gallery, a spectator whispered, "He really said that?" But Jasmine remained immovable. Trump reclined slightly, satisfied. He'd rehearsed that line, delivered it at rallies in Nevada and Georgia, had it poll-tested for impact and red meat appeal. This was more than grandstanding. This was bait. He expected a swing, a raised voice, a reactive cut from her. He expected fire. He didn't expect strategy. Jasmine slowly reached for the mic in front of her. Her fingers were steady. Her voice, when it came, was controlled and cool, too calm to be comfortable. "I'd like to respond," she said. Not asked, stated. She adjusted her chair just slightly, enough to draw the eye, enough to signal that what was coming wasn't rage, but reckoning. Across the dais, a Republican senator cleared his throat as if bracing for turbulence. On the monitor behind her, the comment feed on C-SPAN's YouTube stream exploded. Whoa, she's coming for him. Finally. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. "You call me disgraceful," she said, "because I advocate for children to not sleep in cages. Because I question whether terrorizing desperate families is what this flag was meant to stand for." She turned briefly to the committee chair, then back to Trump. "You want to make immigration a weapon? Let's talk weapons." Her staff, seated just behind her, began sliding a yellow folder forward on the table. A thick tab labeled Trump Family Immigration. Ration Record, 1885 to 1972. Trump's jaw tightened, no smirk this time. He straightened, squinting slightly. Jasmine's voice grew colder. "Because if we're going to measure patriotism by who crossed which border and when, then I suggest we take a long, hard look at who you really are." Now the gasps came. A reporter stood at the back of the room, fingers flying across their keyboard. One of Trump's legal aides reached for a notepad, whispering something rapid into a mic clipped to his collar. Jasmine leaned back. "I won't be shamed by a man whose own family history reads like the asylum applications you now call criminal." Trump sat still. His fingers, which had moments ago been drumming casually on the wood, had stopped. The tension didn't need music. It had memory. It had lineage. It had a reckoning waiting at the edge of every sentence. And the reckoning, it seemed, had just arrived. Trump didn't waste time. Within hours of the hearing's lunch recess, his media machine kicked into gear like a missile system on standby. Fox News was already running B-roll of border key crossings under a flashing chyron. Crockett's migrant agenda exposed. Segments looped her quotes from old House floor speeches, one where she had pleaded for asylum reform after a Honduran toddler died in U.S. custody. They clipped it mid-sentence, twisted compassion into chaos. "She wants open borders," a panelist snapped. "She cares more about cartels than communities." Trump's digital team wasn't subtle either. A coordinated tweet storm painted Jasmine as a radical leftist aligned with George Soros. Dozens of right-wing influencers reposted the same image. Jasmine next to a faded U.S. flag with bold text, "Defund ICE, fund illegals." Inside the hearing room, Trump wore that smug, familiar calm. As if he were already watching the headline solidify, he believed the damage was done. Jasmine sat still. Her tablet screen glowed softly as her aide leaned over and whispered, "It's starting. Every outlet's running with it." She nodded. Quiet. Calculating. Not rattled. She was letting them dig their own grave. Piling on assumptions, underestimating her discipline, forgetting the one rule she never forgot. Receipts matter more than rage. In a low voice, she said, "Get me everything on Friedrich and Marianne. I want birth records, visas, and any old statements we can prove false, and pull census archives." The aide blinked. "We're going there?" Jasmine didn't blink. He went there first. Back in the chamber, Trump leaned toward the mic again. His tone was casual, venom tucked behind faux concern. "Maybe it's time we investigate who these people really represent. Because it sure as hell isn't American families." He expected applause from his side of the aisle. What he got was an uneasy shuffle of chairs and a few dry coughs. Because deep down, even his allies knew. This wasn't over. And Jasmine hadn't even stood up yet. Jasmine waited until the room had grown quiet again. Not the kind of quiet that comes from boredom, but the kind that hums with anticipation. Her fingers hovered over the manila folder her aide had just placed in front of her. She didn't open it yet. She didn't need to. Not yet. She looked directly at Trump, her tone slow, deliberate, like a teacher walking a class into a lesson they didn't know they needed. Let's talk about immigration, since that's what you brought to the table. Trump's eyes narrowed. He didn't interrupt. Not yet. You speak of it as if it's some disease. As if the very act of fleeing hunger, persecution, or war is something shameful. But I've gone back through your family's record. The parts you tend to misremember. She opened the folder. Your grandfather, Friedrich Trump. He came here from Germany in 1885. He was 16. He did not speak English. He had no money. He did not have a formal education. He worked as a barber and LA's. Followed a gold rush, opening businesses in Canada, including establishments that, according to multiple historians, doubled as brothels. She let the word hang in the air. Your family wasn't nobility, Mr. Trump. It was survival. It was hustle. It was the immigrant dream. Trump shifted in his seat. And yet, over the years, you've repeatedly claimed Swedish heritage, even when every record says German. Why lie? Why hide the truth of where you came from? No answer. Just the faint tapping of his index finger on the oak desk. You want to paint today's immigrants as lawbreakers, as burdens. But your own grandfather was expelled from Germany for refusing mandatory military service. He was denied re-entry. She held up a translated letter, its seal still visible. Your lineage begins with a man who fled responsibility, sought economic opportunity abroad, and built wealth in a foreign land, while dodging the very same moral criteria you now demand of others. There it was, the shift. The moment the air left Trump's lungs, even if just for a second, he wasn't smirking now. Jasmine continued, quieter this time. So when you call asylum seekers criminals, when you mock migrant parents who risk everything to bring their children to safety, remember your grandfather's name and how close his story is to theirs. The gallery was silent, not out of politeness, but because something sacred had just been exposed. Trump leaned back, crossing his arms. But Jasmine could see it. The twitch in his jaw, the flicker of calculation behind his eyes. He wasn't used to being outflanked, especially not with facts. But this wasn't personal vengeance. This was precedent. And she was just getting started. Jasmine didn't pause. She had them now. Not just Trump, but the room, the senators, the aides, even the stoic-faced camera operators. They were listening in a way that said they weren't just hearing her, they were absorbing. She closed the folder, placed her hands flat on the table, and looked slowly across the aisle, sweeping eye contact with each Republican senator like a judge measuring the jury. How many of you wouldn't be here, she asked quietly, if immigration law in your ancestors' day looked like it does now? No one answered. She stood. Ellis Island didn't require a college degree. It didn't ask for English fluency or 6 figures in the bank. Your grandparents came with calloused hands, heavy accents, and prayers stitched into their coat linings. A murmur stirred. Senator McHenry shifted, then reached for his water. Senator Collins glanced sideways but said nothing. Jasmine stepped forward. In 1924, Congress passed an immigration law to block Jews, Italians, Asians, anyone considered racially inferior. That law was built on eugenics. It shaped this nation's cruelty for generations, and today, we echo its language in new clothing. Her voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but weight. When Trump calls immigrants invaders, he repeats the same poison that was once used to keep his own family out. She turned to Trump again. Your rhetoric didn't begin with you, but you've sharpened it into a weapon. Trump raised a brow, clearly gearing up to interrupt. Jasmine didn't give him the space. You've built an empire on branding yourself the exception, the golden child of bootstraps and brilliance, but that empire was erected on the backs of immigrants, German, Scottish, undocumented laborers, visa holders, all the very people you now vilify. Her tone shifted, lower, slower. This debate is no longer about laws, it's about whose humanity we validate, and whose we erase. The room was dead still. In that moment, she wasn't just defending migrants. She was indicting the selective memory of a nation. And as she sat down, one thing became painfully clear. She wasn't dismantling Trump's argument. She was dismantling America's myth about itself. Trump leaned forward, jaw tight, voice a little louder than before, like a man trying to reclaim ground already lost. "My family came here legally," he snapped. "We built something. We didn't sneak across deserts or sponge off welfare." He looked around, hoping to catch nods from his party, but none came. Just blank faces, blinking slowly under the weight of Jasmine's words still hanging in the air. Jasmine didn't move. She didn't blink. Instead, she reached for a single sheet of paper and slid it across the table like a playing card in a final hand. "A 1905 letter," she said calmly, "from the Kingdom of Bavaria. Your grandfather, Friedrich Trump, was ordered to return to Germany for mandatory military service. He fled. He ignored the summons. When he tried to go back years later, they rejected his re-entry, called him a draft dodger, a political evader." Trump's nostrils flared slightly. She lifted another document, old, yellowed, with handwritten lines and a federal seal. "And this, a 1920 U.S. census listing the Trumps as German immigrants, not Swedish. That lie. It wasn't a mistake. It was a business decision. Your father told the world he was Swedish during the rise of Nazi Germany, so you wouldn't lose Jewish tenants in New York." Gasps this time. Audible. A reporter's pen snapped mid-sentence. Trump's face hardened into silence. Jasmine's voice, still even, cut sharper than a raised tone ever could. "Your whole narrative, the legal path, the clean heritage, the proud lineage, is paper-thin, built on evasion, on erasure, on branding. And now you want to close the very door your ancestors ran through." He opened his mouth, but no words came. Just the twitch of a man realizing his old tools didn't work here. Jasmine sat back. "You didn't just lie about other men," she said. "You lied about your own bloodline, and now you want to rewrite the rules for everyone else?" A long silence followed. The air was heavy, not with noise, but realization. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was exposure. And Trump, for once, had nothing left to say. Jasmine didn't slow down. The silence in the room wasn't hesitation anymore. It was surrender. Even the senators who had come in smirking were now studying the edges of their notepads, avoiding her gaze like it burned. She opened a new page from the folder, this one crisp, clean, a scanned marriage certificate from the 1930s. "Let's talk about your mother." Trump looked up sharply. "Marianne MacLeod, born in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland. She arrived in New York in 1930 with $50 and a suitcase. She was a domestic worker, cleaning homes, sending money back across the ocean to her sisters." A slight flicker passed through Trump's face, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Jasmine continued. "She didn't come here wealthy. She didn't arrive with real estate in her pockets. She came like millions of others did, hoping for better." She lifted a printout of Marianne's re-entry visa, dated just before her marriage to Fred Trump. "Your father filed to sponsor her legal re-entry. Family sponsorship. The same policy you've repeatedly tried to eliminate. The same system you've called chain migration. As if it's something shameful." Trump's lips tightened. His fingers twitched. Jasmine leaned forward slightly. "If today's immigration laws had applied to your mother, she would have been denied entry. Poor. No university education. No job lined up. She'd have been turned away at JFK and sent back to the island she escaped." She paused. "You don't just want to build walls, you want to burn the bridge you crossed." Now the whole chamber was still. Not a cough, not a whisper, only the distant hum of live feeds and the slow blinking of senators who realized the ground had shifted beneath them. Jasmine closed the file. "This isn't about security. It's about rewriting the American story to suit your ego." Trump looked down, not in thought, but in retreat. Because now the past wasn't abstract. It was personal. And Jasmine had just turned his origin story into Exhibit A. The moment the hearing broke for recess, the internet exploded. Cable news anchors scrambled mid-segment. CNN cut away from a stock market update to a full-panel replay of Jasmine's testimony. MSNBC ran the headline in bold. Crockett exposes Trump's immigrant roots. Even more surprisingly, the clip aired on Fox, briefly and with heavy commentary, but it aired. On Twitter, the hashtags were already trending. #Crockett claps back, #immigrant hypocrisy, #Marianne had a visa. Commentators called it one of the most devastating cross-examinations of Trump in a public setting since his presidency. Clips of Jasmine's quiet dismantling of Trump's family narrative racked up millions of views within hours. TikTok creators spliced together her line, "You want to burn the bridge you crossed," with historical photos of Ellis Island and grainy black and white images of Scottish immigrants. Even typically neutral outlets like Reuters and AP ran headlines that felt more like thunderclaps. Trump's immigration attack undermined by his own family history. Back inside the Capitol, Trump's aides were in damage control mode. Phones buzzed on silent. One of them whispered into his ear, "It's everywhere." Trump didn't respond. He sat in his chair, scrolling through a feed he couldn't stop. Jasmine's face stared back from every screen. Meanwhile, her team walked quietly through the corridor, heads down, not celebrating, not smiling, just focused. Jasmine didn't need to gloat. The truth had done the heavy lifting. In classrooms across the country, civics teachers printed off quotes from her testimony to discuss in real time. In immigration offices, hopeful applicants watched her speech with cautious wonder. In homes with undocumented parents and American-born children, people listened and cried, not because anything had changed yet, but because someone had finally said it on their behalf. Jasmine had not only won the moment, she had reframed the story, and that was far more dangerous to Trump than any headline could be. The hallway outside the chamber was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that wrapped around power like a velvet noose. Trump stood by the window, back turned, arms folded, jaw tense. Behind him, a mahogany door clicked shut. Jasmine Crockett stepped in, followed by two senior Democratic strategists and a Capitol liaison. No cameras, no microphones, just breath, reputation, and unfinished business. He turned slowly. "That stunt of yours?" he said, voice low. "You think you embarrassed me?" Jasmine didn't flinch. "I didn't have to. Your record handled that for me." There was no audience here, no gallery gasping, just the slow, deliberate chess game of political reckoning. Trump stepped closer. "You want a war? You're not built for it." She stared at him, calm, but her words landed like a hammer on marble. "You mistake my poise for permission." His aide tried to interject. Jasmine lifted a hand. "Let him speak. Let him show who he really is." Trump's face flushed red, but not from fury. From recognition. The old tools weren't working. The bombast, the threats, the ego. None of it disarmed her. In fact, it only sharpened her blade. "You've built an empire out of amnesia," she said. "But I read everything. The lawsuits, the housing discrimination charges, the ads calling for death penalties. And now you want to lecture immigrants on worthiness?" A long pause. "You came from immigrants too," she added, voice softening. "But they weren't criminalized for their accents. That's the only difference." Trump turned back toward the window, but this time the silence was his. Jasmine left without waiting for a reply. The door closed behind her like a gavel in God's courtroom. And in that quiet, something shifted, not in public, not yet, but inside the man who had always feared mirrors. The next morning broke like thunder, not with sound, but with exposure. Cable news was already ablaze. Breaking, Crockett drops immigration files linking Trump policies to family scandal. Scrolled across screens in red. Hashtags exploded. #Trump family records. #Crockett unleashed. Jasmine hadn't said a word. She didn't need to. A single PDF had surfaced, quietly uploaded to a public watchdog site, and then cross-posted by activists. It wasn't just immigration data. It was correspondence, decades-old memos, ICE waivers tied to private prison contracts, and, most damning of all, a series of emails showing preferential processing for Eastern European nationals linked to the Trump Organization's overseas staff. The hypocrisy wasn't just implied, it was digitized. Reporters swarmed Capitol Hill. "Did you leak the documents?" one shouted as Jasmine walked past, calm and composed in a navy coat, coffee in hand. "I didn't leak anything," she said evenly. "I liberated the truth." Meanwhile, Trump's camp scrambled for footing. His legal team issued a statement blaming deep state interference. Fox anchors framed it as weaponized bureaucracy, but the internet doesn't wait for spin. Clips of Jasmine's courtroom confrontation replayed alongside the documents, side by side, her voice, cool, precise, overlaid footage of immigrant families detained under policies his administration had championed. Families unlike his own, families with no money to forget. And then came the kicker, a resurfaced 1997 letter from a Trump attorney seeking expedited visa processing for a Slovenian national, Melania. The irony didn't need narration. By noon, "green card for Melania" was trending above Trump's campaign slogan. Crockett didn't gloat. She just tweeted, "Truth doesn't knock, it walks in and takes its seat." The chamber was packed again, but this time, the air had changed. Cameras weren't just focused on the bench or the podium. They hovered, restless, anticipating something final, something irreversible. Trump entered late, flanked by aides whose eyes stayed glued to their phones. For once, he didn't wave, didn't speak, just took his seat, jaw tight, eyes fixed ahead. Jasmine rose slowly. The silence was complete. "I've been accused," she began, her voice calm but cutting, "of weaponizing truth, of embarrassing a man who never hesitated to humiliate others." A few murmurs fluttered, but she didn't pause. "I didn't reveal these documents for revenge. I revealed them because justice, real justice, doesn't have exceptions for the powerful. Not in my America." She turned, gaze fixed directly on Trump. "You questioned my integrity. You mocked my heritage. You stood behind policies that tore families apart, while shielding your own with silence and strings." Trump shifted in his seat. His fingers tapped the table, but he said nothing. "And still," she continued, "I offer you no hatred, just facts, just proof, and a country watching." The judge leaned forward. "Given recent revelations," he said, "we are compelled to reopen investigations related to the Trump Organization's immigration dealings during the years in question." A gasp swept the room. Trump's lawyer stood to object, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. "This is no longer about a single comment or clash. It is about systemic manipulation. The record will reflect this." As gavel met wood, Crockett closed her folder, nodded once, and turned to leave. Cameras followed, reporters scrambled, and history, real, unfiltered, inked another name into its record. Jasmine Crockett walked out not just as a congresswoman, but as a reckoning.